What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Young Musician's Guide podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Campbell, and today I got to talk with Dr. Joel Collier. Now, Joel is a Besson artist, and he's also a musician with the Salvation Army. And what Joel gets to do with the Salvation Army is essentially he does a lot of educational stuff, but he does a lot of performing and playing. And what our conversation was about is essentially all of the opportunities that are out there for younger musicians with the Salvation Army, either as like a side summer job at any of their camps or even like permanent career positions down the line. Now, some of them do require you to be a Salvationist, but a lot of them do not. And it was also really cool to kind of hear the history and how the Salvation Army has impacted music, which was a fun conversation to have, and I'm really excited to be able to share that with you guys. But before we get into all of that mess, I do want to remind you that if you like this, if you're getting some good quality out of this podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, hit comments, do all that sort of stuff to get us up in the algorithms, to get more people to find us so we can grow and do bigger, better things. And if you're really liking this, a great thing that you can also do is go ahead and share this with a friend and let them know what this podcast is all about and get this into their ears, and I'm sure they will appreciate it. I'm sure everybody knows someone who could use some guide and help with their career choices in the musical world. And lastly, if you do have a spare couple of bucks laying around, think about heading over to the Patreon, linked in everything down below, and consider becoming a patron of the podcast. If you pledge $1 every single time I make a podcast, $1 comes out of your bank account, which is $2 a month. That might not seem like a lot to you, but let me tell you, it is gigantic to me. So really consider becoming a patron. There are also patron-specific incentives that you can see on the Patreon page as well. But that's all we've got going on today. Oh, also, I am doing a giveaway. If you are listening to this in real time, I'm doing a giveaway of a couple of stickers from Red Label Shirts. If you're interested in that, head over to the Facebook artist page that I have, facebook.com AKCEuph. And go watch the morning masterclass that I do on Saturdays on Instagram. And in there, I talk about how you can win a pair of stickers from Red Label Shirts. Now, if you haven't checked out Red Label Shirts, I highly suggest it. I highly suggest you go and look at some of their stuff. Some of the neatest kind of band nerd apparel I've ever seen. I highly, highly suggest you guys check it out. But anyway, that's enough with all the business side of things. Let's get into our conversation with Dr. Joel Collier. But do they get so there's a little farm, do the kids get to like, I don't know, help upkeep with the animals and all that kind of stuff?
Not so much. It's more like they get to feed the animals, they get to learn about the animals. We get a lot of city kids, so they've never even seen some of these animals.
That's what I was about to ask. Where does your camp pull from?
Yeah, Kentucky and Tennessee. So we get, you still get the cities like Nashville, Memphis, Louisville, where these kids haven't really, the rest of them live on farms, they get it, but you still get, like, Memphis kids have never seen a farm before in their life.
Really? Yeah. I remember working at the camp up in West Virginia, and, like, it was all Baltimore kids, and right. A lot of them were like, what are mosquitoes? I don't understand what's biting me.
Exactly.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks for coming on and hanging out and let me have my coffee with you this morning.
Yeah.
So you're at camp right now?
Yep.
Are you allowed to say what camp you're at?
Yeah, Camp Paradise Valley.
And this is a strictly Salvation Army music camp, or is it one of the intermingling ones?
It's so my delegates are the students that I have coming in are almost entirely Salvation Army kids. The ones that are not Salvation Army kids are still kind of connected to the program. I have 2 kids coming in whose mom works in the youth and music department with me. But my staff comes from all over. So I've got staff. I have, I think, 6 staff coming in from JMU. I have a staff member coming in from Asbury University, another one from University of Kentucky, and then 2 from Kansas. And none of them are Salvationists.
Gotcha. Are most of the campers, are they involved in the Salvation Army church, or do they just sign up for the camp?
Yeah, so for my program specifically, they're Salvation Army kids, because our program is geared towards training musicians that are going to be playing on Sunday mornings. So that's the whole focus of our program. So I have 2 different groups of kids come in, actually. I have a junior conservatory that's 1 week long, and that's for 7 through 11-year-olds. And so that's kind of a more introductory level, obviously, just based on their level, their age, their level of playing wouldn't be as high. But then I also have a 4-week senior conservatory, which for 12 to 16-year-olds. And then these are people who are actually already doing things on Sunday mornings at the Salvation Army. So it's really training and developing the skills that they already have and already use.
And so do your students get to play because all of those camps, they always have service on Sunday. As a whole camp, do they get to play the service with like staff intermingled, or are they all on their own, or how's that work out?
Yeah, so with the junior conservatory, it's really going to be the staff that'll be doing that worship day. They'll sing a song or do something like that on it, but they're not going to be running the service. They're just not old enough to handle it yet. But for the senior conservatory, over the 4 weeks, we will phase the staff out. Maybe not entirely, but we'll diminish the staff's role and increase the delegates' role, so that by the end of the 4 weeks, the services and events that they're doing towards that last weekend, it's really just the delegates are doing, the students are doing it with some staff assistance, rather than it being mostly staff.
And the camp isn't like, and this is kind of a blanket statement for a lot of the Salvation Army camps, but like, they're not all, it's not all rehearsal all day, all music theory and all that. It's not, right. It's not all that. Like, they actually get to do some camp type things, right? What are some of the activities that you guys have at your camp?
Yeah. So, the way our normal day is set up, I actually decided to set it up kind of like a music school, for the first part of the day. So they're going to they start with devotions after breakfast, but then after devotions, they go into all of their music programs, which would be their majors of band or piano, and choir and theory class and sight singing class and rhythm fundamentals classes. So it's set up more like a music school because that runs until dinner. But from dinner till they go to bed that night, it is all camp recreation stuff. So they're getting to go to the pool. They're getting to go out on the lake, on boats. We've got a huge lake. We're situated on Dale Hollow Lake. So they're getting to go out and swim in the lake, go out on boats. We do all the other, camp recreation stuff, sports, playing games, messy nights. So they get to do a lot of those things that they like to do. Campfire skits are all scheduled in throughout the summer.
Really cool. So it's a pretty well-rounded day. How long are the camps normally?
My camps, the junior conservatory is 1 week, and then senior conservatory is 4 weeks. But there's also main camp. There's also just regular outdoor camps that are happening at the same time. And those camps are each just 1 week cycles. So the kids will come in and out 1 week at a time, while my kids are sticking around for 4.
So you keep saying like your camp and my kids and all that kind of stuff. Let's keep in mind, everybody, that he's not the head runner of this entire camp, right? You're just part of the music division. What's the actual title that you have?
Yeah, so I'm the divisional music director for the Kentucky-Tennessee division. So I work with the youth department, the divisional youth secretary, which is right now Captain Matt Cunningham. He is in charge of the entire camp. So he and his staff run a program that involves a few hundred kids that are doing just general outdoor camps or some kind of youth development camps and things like that. But while they're doing that on the same property, I'm running a music conservatory for a smaller group of kids that are set apart a little bit. We don't intermingle that much just because of our schedule being so totally different than theirs.
And so what were your responsibilities in terms of setting up the camp? So you said the staff, right? So did you hire all of the staff?
Yeah, so I have 14 staff coming in, and I had to hire all of them. It runs from fresh people that have just finished their freshman year up through people that are getting ready to start their doctoral program, and they're all different jobs. So I have a program director who's basically my right-hand man, will help me run everything. And I have somebody that I hired to be a brass instructor. I'm really excited about that. It's John Nye, a good friend of mine from JMU who just finished his master's at Cincinnati.
He's going
and is
back,
about
right?
to go back to JMU. Yeah, he's about to start his doctorate at JMU.
Nerd.
Yeah,
and
I know.
Flugelhorn,
Who does that? That's right.
I hope he's
so
doing
he's
Flugel.
coming. Yeah, he's coming to be my brass instructor. He'll be doing a lot of the brass teaching with me. But then I have, because of how large the program is, I have a dean of men and women. This year I have an engaged couple who are actually really, really great musicians, so I'm excited about that. But then I have 4 counselors for each gender and a floater counselor for each gender. But all of those counselors also serve as instructors, maybe in a smaller capacity than the instructor and the deans, but they will still be, getting time in front of groups, getting time in front of classes, so that they can develop the skills that they're learning at school too. I think of them as students here as well, obviously in a totally different capacity than the younger students that are here as delegates. But those that are here as undergraduate music education majors are getting invaluable experience actually standing in front of an ensemble and learning how to conduct.
Oh yeah, I mean, folks, it's well and good to stand in a room or sit in a room and listen to a lecture about educational principles and properties and all that kind of stuff. But unless you're actually physically doing it, you don't get a real sense of what's going on. And so if you can teach, I started with marching band camps, and I've done one of these Salvation Army camps, but if something like this falls into your lap and you have a chance to get hands-on experience, that's invaluable, whether you're getting paid for it or not. But these guys are getting paid a little bit too. Plus they get fed, they get boarded, right? I mean, they just have to get themselves there.
Right, and we do some cool. Well, we're only doing one trip, but it's just it's an opportunity to get off camp and do something as an entire group. And then the big selling point, I think, with my program is I get to have a lot of cool guest artists come in, and the guest artists obviously work with the kids. That's why they're here, but they also get to work with the staff. And so they're not only getting feedback from me, which I'm sure over the course of 5-6 weeks over the summer would get really tiresome, always hearing from the same person, but they're getting feedback from these guests that I have coming in that are professional brass players that know what they're talking about and are able to give feedback not only to the students, but also to the staff on what they're doing, and maybe even get some lessons in too.
So if it's not camp time, because I know that's a big preparation for something with your position. So what's going on for the rest of the year in terms of your position? Because it's a pretty big chunk. It's a pretty big size of state that you work with. So what kind of things do you manage? What projects are you a part of for the Salvation Army? Yeah,
so I oversee a few different things throughout the year. The first is that there are different Salvation Army music programs at each local area. I mean, not necessarily every single one has a program. Some used to have them and it fell off, or some just never had them, but they're getting ready to start up. But for those that have music programs, I help provide resources for them so that they know where to look for what they should be teaching their kids. They know what music to buy that'll fit their ensemble, both in instrumentation and in skill level. I'm basically helping provide resources for them, and I show up just to see what they're doing and see how I can help them develop their program. So there's lots of different places. I can go to one in Richmond, Kentucky, and then the next day, travel down to Memphis to see what they're doing in their program down there.
Great. And then are there playing responsibilities for yourself as well?
Yeah. So not as many playing responsibilities. I take some upon myself because that's what I do. But a lot of what I do is teaching and conducting. So I also run a divisional music event, I guess you would say, basically once a month throughout the school year, where we have lots of different ensembles. So we actually have two dance ensembles. We have a theater group. We have two different level bands. That all come out here to camp once a month, Friday, Saturday, once a month throughout the school year. And that's basically an opportunity for these kids to see each other all throughout the year and to get different teaching than they would get at their local area. So there I get to conduct the top band. But again, that's a conducting responsibility, not as much of a playing responsibility.
And you don't have, so I know you have the master's and doctorate in performance, and then your bachelor's is in engineering, right?
Music industry, yeah.
Industry. So you don't have a bachelor's degree in education.
Nope.
But you're doing a crap ton of teaching. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not to say, and I say this just because a lot of people get, a performance bachelor's or some sort of bachelor's that they end up, they end up teaching way more. You don't necessarily have to have had an education degree to be a fantastic teacher or get involved in education.
Some of the best teachers I know don't have education degrees. Now, it means that I right now can't just go get a public school job because I don't have, a teaching certification or anything like that. That's something that I could do if I decided that I wanted to. But I have a lot of education experience. I've been teaching music as a job since I was 14 or 15 years old. And I've had some amazing mentors along the way, too, that have helped. Plus, obviously, the graduate level degrees do a lot of pedagogy that have to do with teaching. That's mostly geared towards the college level, but a lot of that stuff is still applicable across the board.
Great. So why, you said to yourself, you've been teaching since you were so young. Why not the music ed degree?
So I knew for me, and this is not to say anything about it because I have a lot of friends who are high school band directors or middle school band directors and absolutely love what they do. But I knew already, even before I went into college, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be in a public school conducting a band. And I think it's just a little bit of my own personality influenced that decision. I love teaching students of all ages. I've had some very young students. I have some adult students now. But I really love teaching people who really want to learn. And so I like these elective type things. These kids that are in these music programs here are doing it solely because they want to do music. It's sometimes actually inconvenient for them to do these groups just because it's another thing added on top of what they're already doing in school. And so the ones that are participating are the ones that are usually very serious about it. It's not at all kind of a social activity. It's I want to do this because I want to get good at this.
Awesome. So when you get done with your Salvation Army job at night, you just go home and you're done, right? That's all you do.
Yeah, absolutely. If only.
So what other projects have you, been involved in? Because you do a lot of performing. You're a Besson artist, obviously. You've commissioned a lot of works. You're writing as well. Your CD was fantastic. It hasn't been out for all that long, all things considered. Which if you haven't picked it up, I'll link it down below. has a killer, by the way. You'll hear that second baritone.
That's right. That second baritone player comes shining through.
Yeah. So what are some of the things you're involved in as a performer? I mean, you've been a little bit of all around the place here recently.
Yeah. So I actually leave today for Atlanta to play with one of the bands I play with. I play with the Salvation Army Southern Territorial Band, and this is an awesome band that I get to play with 3, occasionally 4 times a year. So it's not a whole lot. We'll show up tonight and have a rehearsal tonight. And some rehearsals tomorrow, but then we're performing from tomorrow night through Sunday. So it's real quick turnaround, which is a lot of fun. And that is made up of members that are also Salvation Army people like me, who are kind of really the best that the Southern Territory has to offer. We come from all over Texas, Oklahoma, all the way over to Maryland and Florida and everywhere in between. And we do get to do this a few times a year.
Who directs that one?
That's directed by Nick Simmons Smith. He is the territorial music secretary for the Salvation Army, so he's based in Atlanta. He's awesome. He actually wrote the first piece on my CD. Really great guy, great composer, and I really enjoy sitting in his bands, having him conduct.
So is it all Salvation Army music, or do you guys get to branch out for some other brass band things as well, or?
Well, this particular band, just because of our limited schedule, we don't. Our repertoire is not overly large. I mean, we're doing new stuff every time we get together, but it's like 1 or 2 new things, and then we have, our nucleus of 6, 7 pieces that are, concert repertoire for the season. But a lot of that is actually written by members of the band. So Nick writes a lot. I've written some, and one of our tuba players, Andy Barrington, writes a lot of them. And Dr. Steve Kellner, who you've met, he writes a bunch of them too. So a lot of stuff actually comes from within the ensemble. We also have a lot of composers that you'll know that are Salvationists that actually live in our territory that write music for us as well. So people like James Curnow and Steve Bulla both live in this territory and both write music for the band.
It's so interesting, too. I've seen a good correlation, especially with the 2 you just mentioned. I work with a lot of middle school wind bands down here in the area, and they write music for those ensembles too, away from the Salvation Army, just writing as composers. And what I've noticed, and I wonder, and I'm not saying there is any correlation, but I wonder if it's because they have so frequently had to write for more amateur musicians or younger musicians, that their middle school music is good.
Yeah.
As opposed to a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah. Those 2 in particular, they are very, very intentional when they write their music. Just because it's fewer parts or simpler parts doesn't mean that it can't be great music. I know for a fact that particularly Jim Curnow, when he's writing some of the lower grade, some of the easier music, he says it's actually a bigger challenge to him at times because of the limitations to still make it worth listening to, but that's what he wants to do, is always make music that's worth playing, worth listening to.
And it makes sense. There's for lack of a better word, there's so much garbage down there in terms of, like, in Florida, the grade 1, 2, 3s-ish area. 3, you start to get into some real literature, but, like, there's so many 7th grade bands playing just terrible stuff, and I find that Jim and Steve's are not, and they're also writing good books for young soloists and all this kind of stuff. And so the really interesting thing too is when I go and work with these middle school bands and I see, Kernow's name on the piece of paper, I go, oh, he's a Salvationist. And I'm so glad that I've had the experience with Salvation Army people to understand what that means and where they're coming from. Because the teachers that I say that to, they go, like, those guys who swing the bell outside of Walmart at Christmas time, and I'm like, there's so much more to it than that. So what are some of the can we break some of the misconceptions here and kind of what the Salvation Army, especially on the music side of things, means and is?
Yeah, so for those of you listening that don't know, the Salvation Army is a church. That was its first intention. That continues to be its main intention. And all of the other social stuff comes from our outreach as a church. And it started in England in 1865. And what was happening in England musically in 1865 was the rise in the popularity of brass bands. And the two kind of grew up together. So people started, the Salvation Army started using brass bands just to get attention. And it just became kind of part of our identity. It's a throwback to obviously Victorian England where we're coming from, but it's still maintained such an important part of our identity that just like you mentioned the bells around Christmas time at the kettles, the Salvation Army band is also kind of a ubiquitous image of the Salvation Army. And so musically, that's kind of been the main focus, and that's why it's so brass heavy, is because rather than, an organ in a church on a Sunday morning, they'll have a brass band playing the hymns and accompanying the singing. So that takes training, that takes developing musicians to be able to have a band that can do that. You're not training one organist, you're training a band of 20, 30, sometimes 40 people. And so that focus on music education just grew out of the need for training our own musicians to have brass bands for our worship services.
So, and also the cool thing, if you guys don't know about brass bands or how anything works out, I mean, you can play every instrument with the same fingerings if you're reading the music too, right? Yeah.
So, that's the real advantage to treble clef. Obviously, it doesn't work for trombone. Because slides versus valves.
They don't even have buttons, yeah.
Right. And now bass trombone is written in bass clef, but that's kind of a specialized instrument already. Just to already play trombone, you have to learn the slide stuff. And so that's really a specialized seat. But literally every other valved seat in the band, if you know that C is open, D is 1 and 3, you can move all the way from B flat bass up through E flat soprano, assuming your chops can handle it.
Yeah, so it makes it really nice and easy. And I found that a lot of the Salvation Army people were willing and, able to jump around. And they also because there are books you guys play out of, regularly. Right. Like there's a hymn book, there's a march book, there's these kinds of things. And right. So a lot of people, normally a tenor horn player is comfortable moving over to, second cornet and also knows the part already.
Right, yeah. A lot of it, because the hymn books are mostly laid out in soprano, alto, tenor, bass format. There's some additional parts, like the trombone parts, if you have a section of trombones, are sometimes these fanfare parts on top. The euphonium part is this obligato, but still, the second cornet, for the most part, is playing the same part as the solo horn. They're playing the alto part. And that also helps with the cohesiveness of the band, the nice warm colors of the band, just because of how much doubling is happening on different instruments. But yeah, my brother is an example of one of those that'll jump around instruments as needed. He's right now the solo horn player for the Princeton Brass Band, but he used to play in the horn section of the New York Staff Band as well. But if you look around for photos of him in Salvation Army bands, you'll see him sitting everywhere from principal trombone to flugelhorn to second euphonium to E flat bass, and even percussion. So he's really jumped all around the band, and he's one of those that's able to do it. But it helps that all of this is just all treble clef. It's the same fingerings.
And if you go and see a brass band, odds are a lot of the people sitting on stage are also Salvationists.
Yeah, that's true. You see that at NABA, you'll see that if we were at the brass band championship and you just asked, hey, everybody that's a Salvationist or former Salvationist, grew up in the Salvation Army, raise your hand, I'm sure it would be at least a third of the group.
I play in a smaller known brass band down here in Tampa called the Sunshine Brass Band, or I was. I'm done with them now. We're on our hiatus for the summer, but the director and all of the tenor horns are all Salvationists. and he writes for the Salvation Army, and all that kind of stuff. So it's it follows you around, and once you're exposed to it once, you kind of get an idea of what it is. It's really exciting to like come up and say like, and they get excited too when you go, yeah, I understand. I might not be a Salvationist, but I understand your world and the things you've been involved in, and I've taught at your camps and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really glad for the experience. So let's talk about like, long-term career-wise, are all of the, the things that you can make your bread and butter in the Salvation Army, are they all just for people who have grown up in the church and been a Salvationist their whole life, or, do they bring outside staff in?
Yeah, so there's a couple different levels to this. I'll try to give you the most concise and best answer I can give you. Is summer camps are basically open to anybody. If you're just looking for a summer job while you're in school, or if you're a teacher and you have your summer off and looking for something to do, that's open to basically everybody. It's at the discretion of the divisional music director, but every single Salvation Army Music Conservatory I've worked at has hired, if we will say, non-Salvationist staff. So that's the easy answer. The more career type jobs, like the job that I have, part of the job requirement for the top level, like divisional music director or territorial music secretary, the director positions, those do require you to be a, quote, uniform wearing Salvationist. But that doesn't mean you have to have grown up in it for your whole life. We have the divisional music director in North and South Carolina right now came to the Salvation Army, I think while he was in college was when he was first exposed to it. Now, there are other jobs too. So the job that I just had before this was the music director for the Salvation Army in Fredericksburg, Virginia, just the one location. And while, yes, I've been a Salvationist my whole life, my predecessor in the job, David Murziowski, is a good friend of the Salvation Army and plays in the National Capital Band, and attends the Salvation Army even without being in that job, still attends the Salvation Army most of the time. But he is not a Salvationist. And another person that has held that same position in Fredericksburg, Dr. Kate Woolman, she came to the Salvation Army for the first time after she finished her doctorate. So she was already in a career path, and she started working for the Salvation Army, and she actually now is a Salvationist. So some jobs are open to non-Salvationists. Sometimes people that take those jobs end up becoming Salvationists just because they learn really what the Salvation Army is, and that church background that you talked about, and the missional aspect and the music aspect. There's so much going on for people that are particularly brass musically inclined and looking for churches.
So what, if you kind of had to, and I mean, comparable, is there, because it is Protestant, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what kind of branch would you say kind of aligns with the most for people to get a general understanding?
Yeah. So the biggest, it started as an offshoot of Methodism. William Booth, the founder, was a Methodist minister. So a lot of the theology lines up most closely with Methodist. It is non-denominational. It is not the same as Methodist, that's for sure. But and it's actually in a lot of respects kind of become its own denomination, which it's in enough of the world now you could say that. I mean, it's in 120 plus countries, so we're everywhere.
So all right, so let's talk about you a little bit. So have you always thought that you were going to end up in a Salvation Army gig? I mean, you've got a performance degree though on Euphonium, so it's like military band or bust in terms of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
You knew you weren't going to be a teacher, and so why? So did you always think Salvation Army? Did you just kind of land there? What were you thinking in terms of like as you're getting your degrees, as you're completing your collection? What's going on in your mind in terms of what am I going to do for a career?
Well, it's changed along the way. Actually, just real quick. Before my senior year of high school, I wasn't even planning on doing music. I was planning on doing architecture or some kind of engineering. And then I went to Pennsylvania Governor School for the Arts the summer before my senior year, and realized, oh, hey, maybe I am actually kind of good at this music thing. Let's give that a try. But so when I was in my undergrad, when I started my undergraduate degree, I still had that military band idea in my head. And actually, my sophomore year, I took an audition for the U.S. Navy band. It was the audition that Bobby Barron ended up winning. So I did have that kind of in my mind. But I had some amazing professors in my undergrad, and it kind of made me realize that was something that I wanted to do, is to be a college professor. And so that's why I started on that graduate school trajectory. And that never really went away. That's why I did a doctorate, right? Because why else?
If you want tenure, yeah.
That's right. And so that university professor thing had always been the educational focus. That's why I went straight through school. That's why I did all those degrees. But this kind of job, the job that I have now, was always in the back of my mind. My biggest mentor in my life, and he's still a good mentor to me, is Dr. Harold Bergmeyer. And he was my divisional music director when I was a kid. And my mom actually worked in his department when I was in middle school and high school. And he kind of took me under his wing. I would travel with him for a lot of events, but I remember going into work with my mom and helping him load up the van, and him saying to me, if you're going to be a DMD one day, you need to know how to load a van. And I was probably 14 or 15 years old. And that kind of stuck with me. I knew that was something that I knew what the job was because I had seen him do it. And my mom worked in the department, so I had this kind of close view of what actually went on. And so I think underneath all the other goals and aspirations that I had educationally and musically, that this was something that always still appealed to me and always meant something to me because of how huge an influence in my life he was.
Gotcha. So are you just kind of riding the wave and seeing what opportunities happen, or?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I like this job. I don't have any plans to leave this job quickly or soon or anything like that. I like where I am. Louisville's a great city. If you ever have a chance to come by, any of you, if you ever have a chance to come by, let me know. We can, play duets or something. But so I have no plans on leaving soon, but I'm still pretty young. So I don't think that this is the rest of my career. So it could be 10, 15 years from now that I start really trying to go into that university world again.
And you're still very active as a solo performer away from the Salvation Army as well.
Yeah.
Organizing your own recitals and all those sorts of things too.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I have some cool ones coming up this year. First year out of my doctorate, and starting to do some cool recitals. I did Mansfield University this past year, which was awesome. They actually had me back to do their brass band boot camp. That was a lot of fun. But like this year coming up, I'm doing University of Tennessee Knoxville, University of Tennessee Martin, Morehead State University, and probably University of Louisville. And so just to have this opportunity to still be in that higher education world, the university world, doing recitals and master classes and lessons and things like that.
It's so fun going back and hanging out in school. You miss it while you're there, and then you realize why you're... Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and so you're jumping around, and then you've also got some composing and arranging that you're into as well, and you don't have, and I'm sorry, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but any like quote unquote like formal training in composition, correct?
Right. I mean, the Harold that I mentioned earlier, who was my DMD, he is a composer. I mean, that is his doctorate is in music composition, and I took theory lessons with him. Any of you have ever done the master theory books? I finished those when I was really young, and so the only way that I could get theory through middle school and high school was to take lessons with him. since he had a doctorate in theory and composition, they were very intense lessons.
Terrible source. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They were very intense lessons. But so that was the closest I ever got to formal compositional training. And it was not formal in the sense of a university degree. It was more of he encouraged me to write, and he was happy to take my scores and mark them up with that red pen that looked like it bled over the page. So that was the closest I got to formal training, was just to have somebody who was very, very good at it, willing to look at what I was doing. And I've had a few people along the way do that. Dr. Dorothy Gates up in New York, she does that for me, mostly when I send her scores that I'm interested in having her publish, but she'll send them back to me and say, hey, check this out, maybe change this. So that's the closest I've had to formal training, but it's just kind of been something that I enjoy doing.
And you do, I mean, a lot of your stuff has gotten published and featured in like recordings and all that kind of stuff. And it reminds me of it feels way back now, but the first episode of this podcast, Tyler Klein came on and I asked him, why composition? And he said, well, imagine a world where the only people who wrote were authors.
Right.
And so a lot of people will go, I don't have, I have my base theory or whatever. So, but I'm, they hold back because of that, the level of education that they've received.
Yeah. No. If you have something in your head, write it down. That's the thing is, I look back at some of my compositions that I wrote when I first started. Actually, I look at some of my compositions that I started writing a year ago, and I think, what the heck was I doing? But it was still good to get it on the paper. And not everything's going to be a gem. So a lot of it will never see the light of day. But the exercise of getting it on paper means eventually something will be something that you like.
Awesome. And so, I mean, so you've kind of got your fingers dipped in almost everything involved in classical music right now. Are you writing just for brass band stuff, or is it you're doing some string stuff or anything interesting outside of the norm for a euphonium player?
Yeah, well, just because of the nature of who plays my music, a lot of it is brass music, whether it's brass and piano or whether it's brass band or sometimes brass quintet, brass sextet. A lot of it is brass music, but that's just because that's who I have to play it. But I've also written a number of choral pieces. My first piece I ever got published was actually a 2-part children's choral piece. And so I write a lot of that, just again from my background as a singer in choirs for the Salvation Army. But I have branched out, and I have written a few other things that have been really, really cool to do. I've done the soundtracks for a couple short films, and so I got to create my ensembles for those using woodwinds and strings and other things that I pretend I know anything about. And I also get to do a lot of stuff for, if you will, like those that are in the church world, contemporary bands. So, doing rhythm section stuff, really.
And that's like like the stuff when you turn on, the radio typically nowadays, right, and go to the Christian rock station. This is what you're talking about, what you would hear. Right. And so I've done some actual songwriting in that world. But really what I do is mostly arranging for that. And that's a lot of fun. I got to do one of the coolest projects I ever got to do as a writer was my brother and I, my twin brother Jason and I, were hired to arrange all of the music for a musical that was opening in Lancaster, Pennsylvania a few years ago called The Centurion. And it was using these like Christian praise and worship songs. But obviously there's so much variety there. There was no continuity in those songs. So we got to take these songs and turn them into songs that actually fit a Broadway style stage performance. And that was awesome, getting to do those rhythm charts and choir charts and things like that. That's really cool. Yeah. So you gave me a couple resources that were inspirational to you. Do you want to talk about those a little bit for the audience? And I'll link them below. Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 links, really. The first one is the New York Staff Band.
That's a Salvation Army group that I grew up in Philadelphia, which is in the Eastern Territory of the Salvation Army, and the New York Staff Band is the feature brass band for the Salvation Army in the Eastern Territory. And a lot of amazing people have been in that band, have been mentors to me. Currently playing in the band is Aaron Vanderweel, and he's a euphonium player. He was a big mentor as I was in high school. He would be the section leader for bands that I would play at when I would go to music camps or other events like that. He was always that person sitting in the section saying, no, this is how you do it. And willing to take time with me to do some lessons about really just shaping playing, particularly lyrically. He has this amazing sound that I always wanted to play like him. And so he's still playing in that band. And if you check out their website, you'll see a bunch of their recordings. He's featured as soloist. So really, really great guy, and really, really great band. So I also have a link for the International Staff Band. They it's the same kind of group, except for they're based in London, but they are considered the band of the Salvation Army. They're the model of what a Salvation Army band should sound like. And another amazing euphonium soloist there is Derek Kane, and you can check him out on their website too. He has been the principal euphonium in that band for longer than I've been alive. I think it's 40 years he's been the principal euphonium in that band. And so just listening to those recordings and getting to meet him and hear that band live, I've gotten to know him pretty well over the years, and listening to what he does, not only as a soloist, but literally just sitting in that seat, the principal euphonium seat, is created this model for me of what that's supposed to sound like, and the way that music is supposed to be played.
Awesome. Thanks, sir. And it's really cool. It's so weird to me. All right, so I mean, Joel and I go back, like 4 years now? Something like that?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, and it's so cool. I mean, I spent a lot of time. He and I were both graduate assistants at JMU at the same time, and it's so interesting to, do these, quote unquote interviews and know so much about the person and then learn so much more about the person through the course of the conversation. It's always really fun, and like I have to share this story. So just talking about like salvation. Okay. So he's talking to me at a Salvation. He's at a Salvation Army camp right now. We literally met because I was coming up from Georgia, and he didn't have a car at the time, so I picked him up in the middle of nowhere. North Carolina? Yep. Absolutely. And so we had like a 6-hour car ride back up to Harrisonburg. And I didn't know, like many of you probably, I didn't know anything about the Salvation Army. I didn't know anything about brass bands, really, or any history thereof. And we just sat in the car, and he shared all of those things. And I learned so much about what this is, as many of you probably are now. And it's, I can't think of a better source to kind of get this wealth of information, but in a practical language and understanding, and also somebody who's just ridiculously passionate about all the things that they're involved in. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that on this episode. I really appreciate you coming in. Do you have any advice for anybody who is thinking about doing any of the things that you might be involved in, or trying to help? I mean, picking a career in music is so difficult now.
Yes.
Partially because we're told that there's nothing you can do, and partially because there's a lot you can do.
That's right.
So do you have any advice for anybody trying to make their way up in the music world?
Recognize that connections can come from anywhere. You never know who you're going to meet along the way that is going to be able to offer you a job later. And it's not just in the music world. one of the people that works in the department with me, in the youth department with me, is somebody that I met once at some event more than 10 years ago. And he sat on the committee to interview me for this job. So pay attention to how you treat people and recognize that those connections can come from anywhere. But the other thing is be intentional about making connections. I get emails or phone calls from people all the time that are just interested in music jobs, yes, but also just development in music, whether it's on their instrument or just learning how to be a better teacher or conductor or things like that. And those connections become really important. Like when I'm looking to hire summer staff next year, some of those people that have already contacted me just saying, hey, I'm just looking for opportunities. Well, guess who I'm going to write to first and say, hey, I need to hire staff. So being intentional about making connections too. It doesn't always have to be about careers. Sometimes just a connection for a lesson, or sometimes just a connection for somebody to play in a quintet, can turn into jobs.
And yep. And don't be a jerk. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's the big one.
That's a huge one. Don't be a jerk. Hey man, hey, thank you so much for coming on, especially in such short notice. I literally texted him like days ago. And said, hey, can you do this? And so I've been trying to get him on the show for a while, and I finally found a good spot for him. Hey, Joel, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out this morning. Yeah. Hey, everybody, this is the Young Musicians Guide podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Campbell. Today we got to hang out with Dr. Joel Collier, reminding you always be happy, but never satisfied.